Right, officially good afternoon to everyone. We're just past noon and kicking off today's CPE webinar, Keys to Economic and Tax Incentive Success with a focus on Ohio programs. Another of our alliance partners that, like Quantitax, they don't compete with CPA firms and often assist them in helping their clients to obtain significant incentives, is a Cleveland-based national firm named Silverlode Consulting. Their co-founder and president, Dennis McAndrew, and senior consultant, Sarah Risher, both former PwC colleagues of mine. Silverlode's helped a number of our clients, as well as numerous Fortune 500 and middle market companies, as large nonprofit organizations around the country, particularly in the negotiated and discretionary incentives area. These programs can be tremendously valuable, and more than half the battle is just knowing what's available. Many times these programs are sporadically introduced, withdrawn. Furthermore, they have really narrow windows sometimes for application. And a real world example of this that I always kind of tell, and Dennis is probably sick of hearing it every time I introduce him, I have to go through this story. But about a dozen years ago, we brought Dennis and his team into a small middle market local medical device company that was an IC-DISC client of our firm to discuss incentives they might have been able to take advantage of. The meeting was on a Friday. Completely randomly, the application deadline for a limited time state of Ohio grant targeting biomedical industry companies collaborating with health systems was due the following Monday. The company was discussing just that type of collaboration with Cleveland Clinic, was it, Dennis? Yeah. And so Dennis and his team worked over the weekend. They got together an initial application, which could be and was later amended and updated. They submitted it that Monday, which was the deadline date. That company, that client of ours, ended up receiving $1 million grant, and they would have missed the opportunity had they not luckily, been connected with people in the know. So that award was just as material to that mid-market company as some of the much larger incentives that you guys have been able to capture for much bigger organizations through some of these programs that we're going to discuss today. So we're excited to have Dennis and Sarah join us, and just a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get started to make sure everyone receives their CPE smoothly and they're able to ask questions on the material. You will need to be logged in for the entire session to receive CPE credit. There will be 4 poll questions displayed at random times during the presentation. You'll need to attempt to answer those. We'll leave them up for about 30 seconds each, and you'll need to attempt to answer actually 3 of the 4 poll questions to receive CPE credit. And as far as questions on the material, please do submit questions either through the chat function, or if you'd like to ask anonymously, you can email questions to info@quantitax.com, which you should see in the start of the chat. Ivan had posted that, and we do want to make sure everyone has the chat box open so they can see any questions that come through. Should be at the top middle of your screen for most of you. So anything that Dennis and Sarah will address, anything they can as far as questions during the presentation, anything that's asked and they're not able to get to will certainly be answered with a return email. After the webinar, we'll send presentation materials to you in an email asking if you need CPE. Just respond to that email as instructed, and we'll have your electronic CPE certificate emailed to you, and also a link to the webinar recording and a couple other materials as well. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Dennis and Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon for those of us who are in Eastern Standard time zone. I'm Dennis McAndrew. As Amit mentioned, I'm the founder and president of Silverlode Consulting. With me today is my colleague Sarah Risher, who a longtime colleague of mine, Sarah Risher. We're pleased that everyone joined us today. It's a beautiful day here in Cleveland, Ohio. I assume same for where else folks are tuning in from. So I appreciate everyone spending a beautiful afternoon with us instead of out on the golf course or something. Hopefully we've got some good information to share with you about economic incentives. Just a little bit of background on our firm. We've been in business since 2002. Myself and a now retired business partner from EY. I founded the company in 2002. We'd worked together at other big 6 at the time firms, including PwC. And the bulk of our relatively small organization is former accounting folks, not only Big Six, Big Four, but some regional accounting folks as well. So I think one of the things that makes our firm a little bit different from some of those that we compete with is, we place a high emphasis on customer service and getting to the right answer and supporting our work after the fact. We're not a sales organization. We're a quality focused organization, and our clients tend to stick with us for a long time because we aim to provide good service, and we must be doing that because they've been with us for a long time as a general rule. Our services, our firm works in sort of 5 macro areas, 2 of which are the topic of our conversation today. They're in the blue boxes on the lower left there. The 2 things we'll talk about today is our discretionary or negotiated incentive services. And Sarah will cover that material when we get to it. I'll talk a little bit about our federal and state tax credit service offering, but we also provide economic impact analysis services, which for anyone who's interested is, we help organizations to measure the comprehensive impact that they have on different geographies. So for instance, some of our healthcare, we work with a lot of big healthcare systems that want to know what sort of the ripple effects of their presence in a place are. So we provide that service for a variety of health systems and real estate projects and arts festivals and you name it. We also do a little bit of governmental consulting. So we do a little bit of advising governments on incentives. So what's the right level of incentive to provide? What are the appropriate incentives to provide when they're trying to attract a project? And then finally, we do some site selection work. So helping our corporate clients to figure out the places that make the most sense, not just from a incentives perspective, but a total cost of doing business perspective, which includes, of course, tax and labor and utilities and occupancy costs for buildings, et cetera. But again, the topic for today is the boxes on the left there. We've got somewhat of an ambitious agenda for our, let's call it 50 or so minutes together. We wanted to provide a relatively high-level overview of federal and state tax credit opportunities. And as we'll see in a minute, of course, this isn't a comprehensive survey. As everyone on the call knows, federal and state tax credits is an extremely wide, broad topic, and we're going to cover one segment of that today. We'll talk about discretionary and negotiated incentives as well. We'll go through some quick project examples, pitfalls that we see, and then the best practices that we see leading organizations using to manage their incentives portfolios. A bit on our federal and state tax credit offerings. As I mentioned, and as everybody knows, the world of tax credits is very broad, and our focus is we don't try to be experts in everything. Nobody can reasonably expect to be that. So really, our sweet spot is programs that are aimed at job creation and capital investment, typically in qualifying areas or zones, and among qualifying groups. So some examples, and this is just a few brief examples of a relatively wide sea of opportunities that fit into that segment are on the federal side, programs like the Empowerment Zone, disaster retention credits, Indian employment credits, and then just a few examples on the state side: Georgia Job Tax Credit, Colorado Enterprise Zones, Illinois Enterprise Zones, and there's many more. We also, and presumably lots of people on the call here, these networks as well, but for our clients that are looking for help in an area that is outside of our wheelhouse or area of expertise, we have a variety of alliance firm partners, folks that we've that we know and trust, that we can refer our clients to. And some of the areas that we don't that we don't compete in or don't play in are the work opportunity tax credit, research and development credit, new markets tax credits, low income housing tax credits, and that list could go on and on. So a couple things on federal and state tax credits, and some of this will be fairly obvious, and some of it perhaps not. And we put some of this up to kind of contrast it from the discretionary opportunity. But as folks know, federal and state tax credits are primarily claimed after the fact. And again, I'm speaking specifically of like jobs tax credits and investment tax credits for folks that are either employees that are located in a zone or facilities that are located in a zone, or sometimes both. These sorts of incentives are typically claimed after the fact with no pre-approval required, but there are some strange examples where you do need to file a pre-application for what are relatively simple job tax credits and investment tax credits. Like, for instance, I'm thinking of Nebraska, where you have to file in advance. And then there's a variety of incentives, credit-based incentives that need full approval in advance, and we'll talk about those in the discretionary section of the discussion. But some of the state job tax credits, for instance, in Indiana and in Ohio, require not only pre-approval but negotiation and execution of agreements and such in advance. Another hallmark, and again, this is in contrast to what the discretionary incentives, of course, tax credits have some degree of retroactivity, right? So for our clients, if we take on a new client, we're scanning for credit opportunities for any periods of time where they might have a return open that they can claim them on. And in some instances, a prior incentive can be claimed on a current year's return, and we're always looking for those sorts of opportunities. Another thing on the federal tax credits that's in fairly stark contrast to discretionary is they're really, as a general rule, are not many limitations on who can claim these credits or earn these credits. So, for instance, retail organizations, restaurants, manufacturing, trucking, transportation, service industries, things like that are eligible for these incentives, whereas it would be difficult for those sorts of organizations, or impossible for those sorts of, in many cases, those sorts of organizations to take advantage of discretionary incentives. And we'll talk about the reason for that in just a few minutes. Again, as most folks know, these are recurring opportunities. So if you set up a system for taking advantage of, say, a hiring credit, as long as you continue to hire through either turnover or growth or some combination of both, that it becomes a recurring opportunity for the incentive. Also, although not super common, some incentives are transferable, and we're active in making matches between those who are generating credits and those who are in NEDM credits. So, for instance, for anyone who's tuning in from Ohio, things like, and these are somewhat niche opportunities, but there's of course, historic tax credits, both of the state and the federal flavor, are transferable. Ohio Opportunity Zone tax credits are easily transferable. Georgia Grow New Jersey tax credits are transferable, and we do some of that matchmaking. And the degree of effort required to do those transfers varies from place to place. Some it's simple notification to the state of a transfer, and in other cases, and I'm thinking specifically of the HTCs, you actually have to, in order to effect a transfer, have to create an entity that with the two, both the generator and the user in ownership of the entity. So much more complex situation. Another hallmark of tax credits, that's, again, to draw the contrast to discretionary, is there, and I should highlight the word relatively constant. I mean, as everyone on the call knows, tax credits are changing frequently, but compared to the discretionary counterparts, they're actually much more constant. The other hallmark that's notable, again, in contrast, is that they often typically have fairly clear requirements. So you can find the documentation for it in the state statute or federal law, and read the requirements and read the regs, and it's the use case or the requirements are fairly obvious. That's in stark contrast to discretionary incentives, which we'll again discuss in a second. One of the challenges with the credits, and this is what, of course, creates the market opportunity for firms like us, but one of the challenges with these zone-based credits, particularly in the employment realm, are in order to claim them, you have to have very detailed access to very detailed payroll information. You also have to have access to where folks work, and more importantly, often where folks live. And so our delivery of service, and the reason that we're a nice complement to other consultants and the CPA firms is we've spent quite a bit of money over the last several years developing a very robust and very secure system for electronically exchanging payroll information with our clients or with their payroll providers. So each time our clients pay their employees, they send us a payroll file that with who was paid, how much, et cetera. We match that up with information that we've gotten from the employer about where folks live. We're able to scan to determine is their work location in a zone, is their residence in a zone, did they meet minimum thresholds for qualifying for the credit. We can calculate the credit because we know how much earnings they had in that period. And in some cases, certain credits, you can't claim the same credit on the same wages. So you might claim the first X number of dollars of wages for one credit and the next for another. So we also have to know how much of a person's earning are being applied in some cases to other credits. So, our system is a back and forth of information, and of course, as everyone knows, this is since this is sensitive data, and cybersecurity is a top priority. We've invested tremendously in ensuring that it's a secure data exchange. We hold that data for audit purposes, and we're able to do so very, very securely. As a result, it takes a little bit of there's certainly some effort in establishing our service with clients, and so as a general rule, I'd say that the service is really best suited to folks that are hiring or organizations that are hiring perhaps hundreds, and in the case of many of our clients, thousands of employees annually, through a combination of either growth or turnover. So we work with a number of restaurant chains and hotel chains and trucking companies and things like that are obviously they may or may not be growing, but they're hiring a tremendous number of people every year. And often realizing tremendous credit opportunities simply through that turnover. Now, I will hesitate for a second to say that the credits, and I probably should have had a bullet point about this, but credits are there's certainly concentrations. Geographic areas where the tax credits are more concentrated. So, for instance, for federal credits, if your client or your organization is operating or in and around empowerment zones, federal empowerment zones, or are located near Indian reservations or in Georgia, certain other states, those sort of hiring requirements can be significantly lower due to the higher concentration of credits. Yeah, I think there's a question from the chat.
There's just a comment, and it mentions taking a look at the map for seeing if your company qualifies for WOTC. I guess my understanding was that while company location is important, I thought that regardless of where an organization is, if their employees are under 40 and if they live in a federal empowerment zone, they're eligible for WOTC, as opposed to where the company's location is. Is that right?
In the case that yeah, it'd have to be it'd have to be work and live in a empowerment zone.
Yeah, okay, so that's both.
And that's why we're getting that's why we're not only getting payroll information, but the address information for clients as well.
So I'm going to talk about the discretionary and negotiated incentives, which work very different from what Dennis just talked about, the state and local tax credits. These type of incentives are forward-looking. There's not really an opportunity to go back and secure them. I've had companies approach me and say, we started this project, what's available? Your leverage really decreases once the project starts. And a lot of the discretionary and negotiated incentives programs require that the project cannot start until it's approved. These type of incentives are applied selectively to encourage projects to move forward, and that may not move forward if they did not receive incentives. So when we work with our clients, we make sure that we understand what the activities that they're going to be doing over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of job creation, payroll increases, and capital expenditures. That information will help drive what programs will be available. Typically, there's multiple awarding agencies for the incentives. So we put the project profile together and then work with the agencies to see what might be available. In Ohio, there are, and much like the rest of the country, there are a number of agencies that can offer negotiated incentives, including cities, counties. Here in Ohio, we start with Jobs Ohio, who reaches out to we start with Team NEO, who reaches out to Jobs Ohio, and ODOD to see what the Ohio Department of Development to see what incentives might be available for certain projects. The Port Authority has a suite of incentives, ODOT, the EPA, the Air Quality Division. There's a number of agencies that you can work with to secure incentives for your project based on the activities that you're going to be doing over the next 3 to 5 years. All of the incentives typically require advanced approval from those agencies. So if you're getting if we're negotiating a property tax abatement at the city level, you'd typically have to go through city council to get that approved. The state incentives almost always need to be approved at an authority meeting or some sort of board meeting. And then you can typically move forward with your project. The timing of the approvals can get needs to be noted and recognized, because typically it can take we'd like to get a 60 to 90-day lead on that, because approvals can take quite some time, and we want to have those before any project activity starts. So we work to try to map out the approval months and timing to make sure that there's enough time to get everything approved before the project begins. And then in terms of the examples of the kind of programs that fall under the discretionary negotiated realm, it's property tax abatements, property tax freezes, where the assessed value of the property is frozen for a number of years so that it doesn't increase based on improvements that are made. Tax increment financing, there's as Dennis mentioned before, tax credits available for job creation based on payroll increases, investment tax credits, And then if there's any sort of training events that are happening as a result of your capital investment or your job creation, there can be training tax credits available, training grants that might be available as well. And then sometimes some of the agencies that you're working with offer favorable financing at below market rates for equipment purchases or project costs. And then there's also tax exemptions, permit fee waivers, utility discounts. There's a number of ways of savings opportunities for each awarding agency.
Sarah, can I
Sure.
interject? Yeah, so with all this stuff, especially focusing on the fact that they're constantly changing landscape, how do you guys keep up with this, let alone how is a company supposed to keep up with what's going on with in their geography or you know, just with these constantly changing credits?
So that's a great question. So it's a lot to keep track of as you're going through this process, just all the steps that I just mentioned and doing them in the correct order and making sure that they're happening in a timely fashion and they're happening correctly. All the while we're trying to we're working on staying in touch with our contacts to learn about changes to programs. We're also, we keep on touch of certain changes in legislation. We work with partners to make sure we understand changes in programs. We always are doing benchmarking on projects that are happening in markets where we know that our clients are, so that we know, oh, this company got this incentive for a project of this size. We should reach out to this client to see if they have anything similar in the future. Anything you want to add?
No, I just one quick thing. I mean, it's a bit of detective work. You're really trying to keep track of. Let's take the Ohio example. You're trying to keep track of not only what one state, the state's economic development agency, is doing, but a variety of other state agencies as well, to see what programs they're rolling out. You're also trying to keep track of what different communities are doing, and that's really the challenge is with 88 counties and hundreds of communities. It's in a changing political landscape. It's hard to kind of anticipate. So what we really focus on the process for uncovering incentives and managing incentives more so than like being like the trying to stay on top of everything that's happening at all times, because that's just a tall order. So we have a very refined process for combing through and finding things when we need them, as well as tracking changes as in real time.
And as far as keeping up with new things, the alerts that you guys offer, right, that people can sign up for, can you tailor those to say, hey, I only want to be alerted when there's something in this state or this geography, or is that even that's difficult because there's so much?
Yeah, we try to in our alerts, we kind of send out the headline programs across a variety of geographies. We tend to send things that are timely. So for instance, as Amit mentioned early on the call and in his example, things come and things go quickly. Like there's been in the last, let's say 5 to 8 years or so, a variety of different varieties of training tax credits and training incentives from the state of Ohio that quickly came and quickly went. And there's a program called the Transformational Mixed Use Development Tax Credit that had a 4-year life. And there's a brownfield grant program right now that's in effect for a short period of time. So we tend to send out things that are like, hey, here's a new program, or here's a significant change that's occurring to a program. So it's kind of driven by what's urgent to get out there versus specific geographies.
So signing up for your credit alerts that's
kind of the goal of the
Get a little of
pilot is to
everything.
let you know, yeah, you get, making stuff you don't need, but you'll be hopefully sure to get the big news and big changes.
Right.
So when we're working with the state and local agencies to talk about negotiated incentives, generally they require a but for incentive. They want to know that if the project isn't going to move forward unless the incentives are awarded, and the incentives have to be an important part of pushing that project through all of its phases. So, but that importance varies. So in Ohio, they used to require, or they still do require, out-of-state competition. They wanted to know, okay, does this company have another location where they could put this project? And this is why we need to offer incentives to have the project move forward in Ohio. At some point, I think we had to provide offer letters from the other state. But like I said, this varies. There's other jurisdictions that are less rigid about this requirement. And out-of-state competition is the most common but we've worked with communities and awarding agencies to help them understand that even though there might not be out-of-state competition, incentives are important to move the project forward as fast as possible, to do hiring as quickly as possible. If it's a multi-phase process, sometimes if incentives aren't awarded, all the phases won't occur. So those are other arguments that we can bring forward when we're talking about what the need for incentives. When we're putting the project description together, the description of the project has to reflect the net effect of all activities at a location. So what that means is if you're going to be hiring 20 people, but it's as a result of 20 people retiring, that they don't consider that 20 new employees. It has to be net new. If you're going to be, having an event where one line closes, if there's a decrease in one side of the business and then an uptick in another, that again isn't a good activity to help drive incentives. It would have to be a net new activity that we would present. A lot of the incentives are offered over a number of years. Most property tax abatements are offered over a 10 to 15 year period. So when you're discussing incentives with the state and local agencies and they come back with an offer letter and there's a total on the offer letter, that's not going to all be received after 1 year. They're often multi-year. A lot of the tax credits are over, negotiated tax credits are over a 5 to 6 year period. I think the JCTC right now is around 6 years. So it's important to be prepared that a lot of the value you'll have to wait for until certain metrics are met or investments are made before you realize the incentives. A lot of the tax credits that are offered typically aren't transferable. But sometimes they are refundable. The Ohio the Ohio Jobs Tax Credit is a refundable credit. There's a credit in Indiana that's also refundable, which means, I think most of the people on this call know, but if you do not have the tax liability to use the credit, you would get, the tax credit would be refunded. After you receive the offer letter, there's a lot of steps that need to happen. I have a lot of clients that approach me and say, I got this offer letter, so where are my incentives? No, the offer letter is great to outline the programs, but typically all of the incentives need to be approved at public meetings, and they need to then be documented in agreements. So there could be 2 or 3 readings of an incentive for a public meeting, and then an agreement is established that needs to be carefully reviewed to make sure that the requirements are reasonable and that the commitments included in the agreement are consistent with what was discussed when the incentives were offered. Most of the all of the incentives really, negotiated incentives require some sort of compliance, typically annual compliance that tracks the capital investment and the job creation that you committed to. Sometimes they can require it quarterly or monthly, but typically it's annual. It's very important to file these reports on time, correctly with the correct data, so that when it's reviewed by the awarding agency, they know that you're moving forward with the project as discussed. And then a part of most of the agreements that are secured for the incentives are recapture or clawback provisions. So if you don't meet the project parameters that were discussed and committed to in terms of capital investment or job creation, there is a risk that the awarding agency could ask for a portion or all of the money back. I just wanted to go through some opportunities where you should start thinking, or your clients should start thinking about discretionary incentive opportunities. The most common are new or expanded facilities. If there's going to be a significant expansion to an existing facility, or if you're moving into a completely new location or building a new location, that's a great opportunity for negotiated incentives. But in addition to that, some other types of projects are relocations. If you're relocating from one jurisdiction to another, consolidation of facilities. If you decided to consolidate a couple facilities into one, those additions to that facility may trigger negotiated incentives. If you're going through a hiring event without an expansion, if you're going to be increasing jobs or adding a shift, that's also a good activity to trigger the incentives. And then building, if you make any upgrades to your building or modernize your facility or equipment, or that's also would trigger incentives. And then employee training, and training is, I mean, everyone's doing it, but if you are using a new computer program, or you bought a new machine and everybody needs training on it, that's a great activity to talk to awarding agencies about incentives. And then there's other activities like research and development or exporting that can also trigger discretionary incentives.
So these activities or these opportunities, when you have this going on in your business, that's the time to reach out to you,
Right.
or agency, county, or whatever, see what's going on.
Well, that's
Go
first.
for it.
Yeah. So we just wanted to go through a few examples of some projects that we've worked on recently. We had a manufacturing client that is located in a downtown area, and they really needed new modern space. So they built a $20 million new facility. They relocated 200 of the jobs to that facility and then created an additional 30. They were awarded a $500,000 Jobs Ohio grant that they used towards building expenses, and a $3.8 million real estate abatement where a TIF was layered onto that abatement. Typically, you might not think that TIF can offer property tax relief. A lot of people associate tax increment financing, or TIF, with public improvements, but it can provide property tax relief for larger projects. And it's a tool that we use frequently to help projects move forward.
The benefit of using a TIF over a traditional real estate abatement is it has a longer term, and in some instances so like a TIF can run out for, in most cases, 30 years, and a few uncommon cases for longer than that, whereas a real estate abatement typically in Ohio would run only about 15 years. And also, some communities are just more apt to use one tool over the other. So it's kind of a matter of, what suits the facts and circumstances the best.
The next example, we also worked with a distributor, an online retailer of auto parts, and they invested $6 million in a building expansion and equipment. Retained 110 jobs, created 105 jobs, and we negotiated a $1.3 million incentive package. 2 of the incentives received were from Ohio, a job creation tax credit and a training grant, and then the remainder were from the local community. One was a property tax abatement, 70% for 12 years. And then the other was a local job creation tax credit where they received a portion of the new withholdings that the local community realized back in form of a grant. We have, with all of our clients, we stick with them through compliance, which proves to be very valuable. We worked with this client through their compliance. They had a second phase. We're working on compliance with their second phase. So we would really like to stay with our clients to make sure everything's getting filed appropriately, and it gives us a chance to keep in touch with our clients and learn what they're doing.
You know, one quick note on this slide. The last two items, the CRA real estate abatement and the local JCTC. Yeah, one of the things that we encounter is local communities, particularly smaller communities, may not know all the incentive tools that are at their disposal. So they have a project that they want to encourage. Maybe they don't see a stream of projects very regularly, and so in a lot of cases, we're actually informing or educating local communities on the sorts of incentives that they can provide there, because they're not even aware of kind of the latest and greatest in tools and practices for using those tools. And this project is an example of that.
And finally, we worked with a smaller manufacturer. This is a smaller investment and smaller job creation number than we typically work with, but they were located in a distressed community. Initially, we were going after a $50,000 grant from the state of Ohio for companies located in certain areas that are owned by veterans, minorities, or women. Their sales were a little too high, so they didn't qualify, but we did end up getting them a $100,000 local grant for an equipment purchase. The state of Ohio provided $75,000 for training, and then the county is providing up to $200,000 for on-the-job training for new employees, new and existing employees.
So just one quick example of tax credits in action. This is a client of ours that had 4 locations in federal empowerment zones and didn't realize that they were eligible for the credit. We scanned for them, found $300,000. They, based on sort of their hiring history, they should qualify for that level of incentive year after year. Just quickly, since we're bumping up at near the end of our time together, a couple of pitfalls, and these are a little bit more discretionary focused, but certainly a lot of these apply to tax credits as well. We'll start in the lower left. One that we see fairly frequently is companies relying on the wrong partner. We've seen real estate agents negotiating incentives on behalf of clients. We've seen construction companies. We've seen companies rely on a local mayor. And, there's a number of problems with that. One, if you're talking to a local mayor, you might be talking about local incentives, and he's not thinking, or he or she's not thinking about state opportunities you might be able to take advantage of. Also, the mayor, of course, is, wants to keep the incentive packages as inexpensive as possible, whereas, and might not know all the tools that are available to he or she. So there's a variety of problems with that. In the real estate broker example, they may open the doors to those conversations, but they don't help with all the things after the fact. They're not there to benchmark other deals. They're not there to help with the approval steps or the negotiation of the agreement points, the annual compliance, etc. Another one that we commonly see is missed approval steps, as Sarah mentioned. Let's take a real estate abatement as an example. It has to be approved by a local community, or let's say 98% of the time, it needs to be approved by a local community, perhaps a school board, definitely a county, certainly the state. And if any one of those is missed, the incentive doesn't go into effect. And we've gotten calls over the years from folks who were steered to us by others, and often CPA firms, that our client negotiated an abatement for themselves, and now it's 5 years later, they don't know why they're not getting it, and we look into it as a missed approval step, and unfortunately there's just no going back on that. So that opportunity that they thought they had, and they moved forward with their project based on the assumption they had, it wasn't there. Another one we see is clients overstating baselines, and I won't go into a lot of examples of that, but this our state, Ohio, and a lot of other states have kind of funky ways of accounting for jobs. And companies tend to think that, that a snapshot of employment at a certain point in time is the number of their jobs, and often that results in a higher count than, or rather a lower count rather, than is appropriate. And so you got situations where people are creating new jobs and not getting the credit that they deserve. Also, sometimes we'll see folks, my competitor, my friend's firm down the road got a real estate abatement. I want one too. They chase the real estate abatement. They don't realize they're eligible for state incentives or some sort of other incentive as well. A big one that we see is folks not realizing, as Sarah's slide showed, the obvious incentive opportunity is somebody's building a brand new building or moving or establishing a new facility. Those are pretty obvious, but the less obvious ones, we see companies creating jobs all the time and not realizing that or adding a shift or adding equipment. They don't realize that there's an incentive opportunity there. As Sarah mentioned, these require advanced and sometimes months of approvals and negotiation, et cetera. And we see clients, hey, the construction equipment's about to be delivered tomorrow. We have the permits, and now we want to talk about incentives. Well, that's a pretty difficult conversation at that point. And oftentimes, the incentive opportunities are already have dried up. One that we frequently see is onerous recapture or clawback provisions in agreements. I mean, we've seen these where, a company gets a 10-year incentive, and if they fail if they say they're going to create 100 jobs and they create 99, they're in default, and the community or a granting authority is reserved for themselves the right to recapture the entire incentive years out into the future for, a technical default of that's extremely minor. We don't ever let that happen for our clients. Those are negotiable, and we work hard to get those to be fair and balanced on both sides. Implementation / claiming problems, as we mentioned, one of the ones that we see, for instance, is folks don't realize that a credit is refundable, and they claim it to the max that their tax liability will allow, and they carry forward a balance that they could have gotten a refund for. A huge one that we see, perhaps the biggest one, is just failing to do compliance or doing compliance wrong. So the annual compliance reporting, if companies mess that up, then the incentive ceases to flow or never flows. And we see that fairly commonly, where one person in an organization negotiates, or even outside the organization negotiates incentives, hands it off to someone else that doesn't know what to do with it, and the compliance falls through the cracks. And then finally, it's not, obviously these granting organizations are looking for folks to make predictions out into the future, and it's not uncommon for those predictions to be off on the high side or the low side. And we advocate an ongoing conversation into the future years with the granting organizations to make sure that those are adjusted if they need to be. Often clients will just they'll fall into a point of default, and the incentive will be rescinded or clawed back, and all because they didn't adjust or maintain a conversation with the granting organization. And then so to turn the negatives into a positive, I mean, some of the best practices that we see that we implement for our clients, and we see high performing organizations using, is of course they're constantly monitoring incentive programs. And as I mentioned, Sarah mentioned, that's a complex matter, and we hope to provide that assistance to our clients. Also, high performing organizations are constantly considering incentives. So each year at the beginning of their strategic planning for the year, they're thinking about, are these incentive opportunities versus, holy smokes, we just created 50 jobs last year, we should think about incentives, and then the hiring exercise has already passed. And as I mentioned, compliance is a pinch point. You know, high-performing organizations pay careful attention to compliance, take it very seriously, do it right, do it on time, and get the incentives that they're entitled to. And then they have regular communications with the awarding agencies to make sure that their goals or metrics or commitments are appropriately set, and adjusting them as time goes by. So that concludes the prepared remarks. We'll scan to see if there's any some questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's a few that came in by email.
Question number one is, are there minimum thresholds in terms of job creation, capital investment for either statutory or discretionary incentives to make sense? Yes, you know, different programs carry different either stated thresholds, or sometimes they're not stated, but you know, we generally say for discretionary incentives, minimum threshold is maybe the creation of, let's say on the very low side, 25 jobs over 3 years, maybe a couple $1 million of capital investment. We talked a little bit about the thresholds for the other programs. Really, for some of the really incentive-rich credit areas, let's take some of the underdeveloped areas of Georgia that you know, you can get into the dozens of new hires and have it make a lot of sense. Question number two is, are certain states or areas better for discretionary incentives than others? Just generally, you know, Midwestern states are great for incentives. Southeastern states are great for incentives. As you get to the coastal areas, particularly ones where you know, development is occurring at a rapid clip, or there's just not a lot of space for development, et cetera, the incentives become a lot less lucrative or beneficial. But Southeast, you know, Texas, Missouri, the Carolinas, Georgia, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, to a lesser extent, Michigan, all great states, Kentucky. Third question, how important are relationships, such as with the local mayor, governor, et cetera, for discretionary incentives? Certainly, discretionary incentives are a relationship-based, you know, exercise, and having those relationships certainly helps tremendously. But as we see folks over rely on that, you know, our as I mentioned early in the call, what's kind of our secret sauce is a very careful incentives process that uses relationships when they exist. So if a company has a particularly strong relationship with the governor or with a mayor, we're going to utilize that. But not having those relationships certainly doesn't preclude the opportunity for incentives.
All right, well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time, and we will have a follow-up to all registrants. You'll get the slide deck and other resources along with your CPE certificate if needed. So thanks everyone for attending, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.